This thing is a long game. And anyone who doesn't see cannabis industry as a long game probably isn't going to be there for the long game, whether it's their choice or not. So
welcome to the Knowleaf podcast. I'm Ted, co-founder of Knowleaf. We're a source and comparison engine for licensed cannabis products. We enable buyers and sellers to make better decisions by providing a platform with trust and transparency built in. The creation of cannabis is based on this culture of collectiveness, and in an industry that is transitioning from the illicit market to the legal market, we inevitably have some interesting startup stories. I've got with me Justinian Mason. He's a sales manager at Vangst. Justinian has a background in recruitment and strategic business development from a variety of industries, including manufacturing, engineering, logistics, distribution, tech, and now cannabis. He's been with Vangst for just shy of 2 years and has helped them establish their presence in the California market. Justinian, welcome. Vangst is the cannabis industry's leading hiring platform. Since launching in 2016 through direct hire and Vangst Gigs, Vangst has connected thousands of professionals with jobs all over 650 leading cannabis businesses around the US and Canada. So Justinian and I met at Cross Campus.
Oh, yeah.
So the conversation started like we were both in cannabis, and it's like pretty interesting to find other people in the space. And then from there, we kept on seeing each other, right? So we've seen each other at Hall of Flowers, we've seen each other at NCIA, other just networking events in general.
Pretty sure I saw you walking down the street with my parents. It's just down.
Downtown is small, right?
Just so, yeah.
LA is big, but downtown is small. So Vangst is the cannabis industry's leading hiring platform. Since launching in 2016 through direct hire, Vangst has connected thousands of professionals with jobs at over 650 cannabis businesses around the US and Canada. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and like just your past and like how you got to this point?
Yeah, so I'll take it back a bit. Graduated college and kind of quickly got into the staffing recruiting industry, kind of fell into the industry back home in Cincinnati. I was selling marketing, had some clients that were in the industry and got offered a job. And, here I am. So like you said, started in manufacturing, logistics, engineering, which is very like contract focused, contract to hire, but at the end of the day, recruiting nonetheless. Started visiting California, bored in Cincinnati after going to college in New York. Started visiting California a couple of times and fell in love, decided I wanted to move here with the intention of getting into cannabis. It took me a while to do so, but it wasn't until I found Vangst, which was a staffing recruiting company that was focused in cannabis, that I knew, I'd found the right company to join. So essentially kept following up until they got me on the phone. And at that point, you're going to stop until I got the job, which was a great decision on my end. So as far as Vangst goes, you mentioned direct hire, you mentioned gigs. At the end of the day, we're a staffing recruiting company focused on the cannabis industry, everything within the industry from seed to sale, from grow to CEO, entry level, all the way to executive level role. We're able to do part-time hiring, full-time hiring, everywhere in between. But at the end of the day, we're here to really bridge the gap between candidates and companies in the industry. And candidates and people at the end of the day are what's going to make and break a lot of companies and what's going to drive the success of a lot of companies. So that's the value we bring.
Nice. So I think you guys have like a really clear pulse on what's going on. You understand the state of the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how people show up?
The industry is in an interesting place, and we try to have a pulse on the industry, but I think we're at the mercy of rules, regulations, and a lot of the kind of waiting game that we're all playing. The industry is legal in certain states in certain cases, but at the end of the day, it's not fully federally legal. So until that happens, I think change is the only constant. That's probably the main thing that I tell people about the industry is it's still changing. We're still at early stages. All companies are startups. So being able to navigate that and how do we navigate that is an interesting thing. Anyone who's paying attention to the news, whether you're in California or not, whether you're in cannabis or not, has probably seen things about the vape issues. It's probably seen things about layoffs. The industry is in an interesting point, still in a great point, just in a point of change, in a point of flux.
Yeah. When we talk about the state of cannabis, news just broke that Drake started a company in cannabis. And at Hall of Flowers, we saw a lot of brands that are launched. We saw $100,000 activations at a trade show. How much of that is actually real life? The industry is thriving, and how much of that is fluff? Where does that leave people finding opportunity in their space career-wise in the industry?
We're at the early stages. This thing is a long game. And anyone who doesn't see cannabis industry as a long game probably isn't going to be there for the long game, whether it's their choice or not. When I see people like Drake get into the industry, he's thinking playing that long game, especially when he joins with a group like Canopy, who, if you look at their recent news, they've been in flux. They've been going through some things. If you just look at most industries, normal industries, and I think of my background, manufacturing is an industry that's been around literally since the Industrial Revolution. They've had their ticks, they've had their ups and downs. All business sectors do. The Drake thing, I call it celebriweed. All these celebrities who get into the industry and have their thing. I love it. I mean, it helps normalize it. I think Drake can sell certain products a lot better than a lot of, us can. So
speaking of which, the supply chain from seed to sell goes from like cultivators, manufacturers, distributors, brands, and then dispensaries, right? So the brands, I think, has the largest popularity. When someone's looking for a career opportunity, they probably first look into how do they get involved with brands, because that's what they see first. They see Drake launching a brand or Snoop Dogg has a brand and they're like, oh, okay, I want to work for that company. Can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the cultivation to even a manufacturer distributor, which is a little bit less popular? People don't say, hey, I want to work for this manufacturing company, because they really don't even know the manufacturing company. Can you tell us about how that structure, what from a sales manager, sales rep, buyer, how does that work? Where would someone get hired in that role?
Yeah, I think it's obviously different for every sector and every link in the supply chain. It's obviously different, but the way I like to frame it is any role or opportunity that kind of exists in the real world or traditional industries exists within cannabis. Whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, HR, accounting, manager, entry level, it exists within cannabis. It's just a matter of, once again, where in that supply chain it falls. So you're exactly right. A lot of people see the brands because from a consumer aspect, you walk into a store, that's all you see are the brands. You don't see what got it there. So as far as opportunities, if you're a cultivation site, that's everything from trimmers and harvest folks.
Which you guys do on demand, temp age.
Yep, which we do that. So, everything from those lower level trimmers and harvest folks to the managers and the head growers. And a lot of these places, the scientists that are behind the production and the cultivation, whether it's concentrates and vaporizer, that's true science. You're taking a plant and distilling it, applying pressure, doing different things to get a different end product. That's a regular manufacturing or production company. Me coming from Cincinnati, where that's kind of old hat and pretty normal, there's a lot of simulators here. So I like to tell people that so they can think about it in that way and kind of normalize it. Because I'll have people come to me and say, oh, yes, I want to sell for a certain brand. And it's like, okay, but you've never sold. You're currently in extraction tech. You're talking to me about selling for a brand. Did you know that you can make more money than you make now to be an extraction tech for this cannabis company? It's about educating people, letting them know what's really out there as far as the industry goes. Because once again, you can work in that cultivation sector entry level on up. You can work in that extraction manufacturing company entry level on up. You mentioned distribution companies. You can be a driver there. You can be a manager there. You can be a dispatcher. You can be a salesperson. You can be a strategic planner. You can be a marketing person for every link in the chain. It really does depend on where a company's at. When you have funding and you can come with a strategy and a plan, you can build out a large company, but we're all startups. Vangst is a startup still kind of getting out of that phase, but there's certain things that we may not have or that we're just now getting ourselves. The whole industry's like that.
Yeah. My next point was, prior to starting to record, we talked about how Q4 people are laying low and trying to figure out Q1 and how to navigate between now and then, because obviously the industry is fluctuating. How does Vangst pitch to people wanting to get into the space and put their resume up with you? How do you pitch someone like, hey, these are startups, but don't worry, the industry's in good shape?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this at work today, like our candidates and recruiter talk. We call it a candidates market. The job industry, regardless of industry right now, is a candidates market where there's a lot of qualified people for a decent amount of roles out there. So if you're a qualified individual, you can really plug and play. When it comes to startups and when it comes to our candidates, if you're a passive job seeker, if you're someone who's currently employed, it's not as urgent as, say, someone who, I don't currently have a job, I need this opportunity in cannabis to continue going forward. A lot of our candidates are calling that passive job seeker. Sometimes they're the best candidates. So I think that's one part of it. As far as end of year, hiring is very cyclical. When you just think about time of the year it is, in 2 weeks it's Thanksgiving. 2 weeks after that is the December holiday season.
Don't even start.
People are going on it's crazy, right? But people are going on vacation. People have bonuses coming up. A crazy variety of reasons as to why on the candidate side it's hard to even look for a job. Same thing goes on a company. When you have executives, when you have managers going on vacation, spending time with family, that can slow down the hiring process. But I'll tell you, people are still hiring. But it's about how can you be strategic and get the right people in place before the end of the year. And really about like, what do you really need before the end of the year?
Are you finding that there's candidates that are applying that just want to be into cannabis because it's attractive and so they're willing to take a pay cut to be involved? Or are you finding that people are trying to be really competitive in the space and saying, hey, you know what, I just came from top consulting firm and I want to transition into cannabis, so pay me top tier to be able to help your company out? How do you?
Well, we see all walks of life. I've talked to people from Google and Nike that I have to have that conversation. It's like, hey, guy, you're not going to make Google money stepping into this cannabis company that has 5 people right now. It's just unrealistic. But at the same time, I've talked to people who are maybe coming from dying industries like mortgage lending or something like that, who are looking for, okay, what's next? What's that next thing? What's that next wave? So we see both sides of it. As far as you mentioned that people are trying to be competitive, that's what it's really about. Regardless of your background, if you're not in it, like I mentioned, for the long game, and if you're not willing to get through the grit and grind of this industry and of that chaos that we've talked about, that's what really is going to make and break a good person. You know, we think about a good salesperson can sell, regardless of what it is, to a certain extent. But for the cannabis industry specifically, how passionate are you about this? How much do you believe in it? Regardless of who you are, once you step into this industry, I'm a believer that you become an advocate for it. So if you're not truly passionate about this plant and what it can do for yourself, for the world, for people, that's what makes people stick. That's what makes people get through, pardon my friends, with the bullshit that we deal with on a daily basis.
What's the most attractive position in cannabis right now? Like, what would you say is like the most sought after? If someone was like, man, I could get any job in cannabis,
which CEO? Let me be CEO of one of these brands tomorrow. That'll be an interesting conversation. But okay, most attractive, that's a hard one. I'm a salesperson myself, so I have to say sales. I'm a salesperson for a reason. I think you really control your destiny, but it really depends on what you want to do. If I had any skill and could get in any role, I would really want to be on the product side. I like to think of myself as a creative person. There's a bajillion types of vapes. There's so many brands of flower. There's so many edibles. Like, I want to see what's new, what's next. Like, I would love to be that person within a company creating that next product. So that's the role I would really want to get into. And we recruit for those roles, like product development, on a couple of different levels. You can develop a new type of product that people are consumed, but you can also be a product developer that's developing the newest type of compliant packaging that's, you know, everyone has to use. And you can come straight from CPG and have just designed, you know, the latest type of packaging for Pampers diapers. Shit, that might be perfect for, you know, the cannabis industry. So it's like, if people can think outside the box and kind of apply what you do now, a lot of cool things can happen. And that's happening in the industry. You're seeing people start to realize, like, okay, this checks, this checks, this checks. I can step in the industry and do some cool things. And I think that's what's going to help us really step forward. Back to Drake, when new people with new ideas kind of diversify the thought pool, that's what we need, man. That's really what we need.
Yeah. So I do want to touch on that a little bit to talk about like the old cannabis compared to the new cannabis, like OGs that's been like trailblazing since beginning of this whole industry, and people who are just jumping into it now. But then I also want to talk about ancillary services, companies that aren't plant touch but are still trying to penetrate the cannabis industry. What do you think about both topics, ancillary services and how they're penetrating the industry, and also OGs versus newcomers?
Start with ancillary services. That's kind of the lane I'm in. Picks and shovels. We talked about it before. Picks and shovels outlast the gold, which is probably a terrible thing to say, but the ancillary services are essential links to any business. They exist in all other business sectors. They have to exist within cannabis. So I think it makes sense. It's just a matter of how can you really differentiate yourself to bring and provide and show consistent value. At the end of the day, not everyone in the real world uses recruiting, and there's a reason for that. So as a recruiting company in cannabis, how can we differentiate ourselves to show that consistent value? As for the OGs, you know, I gotta show love to the people who have been in the industry and have fought the fight. You know, I'm from Cincinnati. I'm first gen. My parents are from the Caribbean, so they fought a fight in a different way. It's got to be tough. It's got to be interesting when you've been doing something for so long a certain way, and you go forward with a step that you think is going to really benefit you, and in the immediate future it hasn't. That's got to be tough. It's going to be a struggle, but I think it goes back to how do you differentiate yourself. Okay, I'm seeing Drake step into the industry, seeing guys like Seth Rogen and certain people do certain things. How do I differentiate myself to make sure that that value is still there? And I've seen it. You see some awesome, well-known legacy strains and growers start to differentiate and partner with certain groups, certain companies to get their stuff out there, and it's really cool to see.
So you brought up your family and you said they fought the fight in a different way. And I'm curious because my next question was going to be about the stigma around cannabis. And I feel like obviously now that it's getting so popular, the stigma is diminishing along with that. But how did you tell your parents, like, yo, I'm working in cannabis now?
I've always been kind of open about it. I call myself a late bloomer in cannabis. Like, I didn't start smoking until college. It was because I knocked my head a couple times playing football, and it helped me sleep, and it went from there. For me, landing at Vangst was a blessing because I could go to my parents and say, hey, yes, I'm in cannabis, but I work for a recruiting company. Yeah. But at the same time, I've always been an advocate. I've always been open and honest about it. Like 2 Christmases ago, I got my mom some CBD stuff for her heels because that's all she wears, keep her feet right. It's interesting, but I think it's really about education. My dad's an analytical chemist, and I sent him some data that you can't deny. And for someone like that, he's like, oh, cool, check. And now you would think he invented the damn thing. And the conversations we have are hilarious because he's bringing me stats and bringing me data. So I think it's about really understanding what the plan is and what the industry is and what it can do. My uncle, my father's from Barbados. Most of the family's still in Barbados, but I'm speaking to him and he's telling me that Barbados is slowly but surely working to legalize it. And his brother, my uncle, was up in a fuss because he's a Rastafarian and he's been, in trouble for doing whatever and being involved with it. And now it's about to be legalized and it's going to be a whole tourist thing. He's fighting a similar fight that, certain groups are fighting here for the same reasons. So, there's layers to it. But at the end of the day, whether they liked it or not, I was going to be in this industry. And you can't deny success, especially when your parents are Caribbean. You know, they want to show them you're okay. And they're like, oh.
Yeah. They're like, oh, it's working out. It's working out. Yeah, I find it funny because at first it was this stigma, but I think now, like, when you tell people you're in cannabis, it's like no longer like this, ooh, you're in cannabis. It's like, oh, I don't know how it was before because I'm like pretty new myself. But now it's like, oh, like you're onto something. Like you're like on the next wave. So it's pretty interesting to see how that transition has happened. The most interesting part is when people like, one, automatically think like you're a smoker, or like just look at you as a pothead, like probably like, oh, he's in cannabis, versus just saying, hey, that person is just trying to be forward thinking about this new industry that's happening. I think different people get different impressions about why they're in the industry. So that's pretty interesting. But that does bring me to the next point, which is social equity. As a new industry, it's a blank canvas to decide how we create social equity in this industry. And I'm curious what you've been seeing based on your experience with Vangst.
It's interesting and it's tough. California is a different beast for sure, and that's the weird thing about cannabis and social equity specifically, where every state and almost every county seems to be trying, everyone's trying, but it's not all the way linked in and locked in. I think it's tough when you have an industry trying to do something and then you literally have the government and the city trying to do something, but once again, it's not necessarily clicking, connecting. I wish I had a answer for how I could solve the social equity problem, but it's something that's been building and it's something that's a little bit deeper than cannabis. I'll be honest in that. I mentioned the government. The industry's trying to fix something that isn't necessarily an industry problem. Social equity is an issue prevalent throughout many industries. We're just taking the blunt of it. I will say there's been progress. We've honestly launched our social equity initiative, and I think it's about, once again, reframing the mind, educating ourselves. Our stance as candidates. That's the value we bring. We provide great qualified people to the industry. And even if you're not qualified, we can help you get that way. So our stance is when you see places like Oklahoma just expunged almost 500 records, places like Oakland and LA will hopefully do the same thing. We're poised and ready to be there to help those individuals get into the industry from a worker's perspective. Because that's been my stance from the beginning. And that's something I was looking at getting into the industry. It's like, shoot, do I try and finesse this equity angle and maybe have a brand or something? But I didn't know enough. Let me get my chops in. Let me get some years of experience. And
I'm still trying to fall into a license.
Let's see what happens a little bit later. But naturally, if you just look at the regular world, there's way more opportunities to be an owner from within or be an entrepreneur than there are to be that entrepreneur. Just looking at the licenses, we had almost 2,000 people apply for the latest round of 200 social equity licenses. That math doesn't add up. Yeah. But I know that there's 2,000 job opportunities out there in cannabis.
Right.
So it's like, how do we help kind of bridge that gap and educate people there? That's really my goal with the equity aspect of it, as some of that other stuff gets figured out. I went to lobby days in DC. I've been blessed to have some meetings with my team members and literally at the mayor's office talking to some of those partners on that side. And I'll say that we're moving, and we as in the cannabis industry, we're moving faster than them. let's make it happen and let's make them catch up.
Absolutely.
That's how I feel about it.
Nice. Yeah, I'm super excited to try to get involved in a few different capacities with just different movements that are happening. I feel like here versus like tech, it's like easier to accomplish. So I know there's a lot of people that are doing some really good work in the space. So I'm excited to get involved. Trends for the future of cannabis, like actually MJ BizCon is coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about what Vangst got up to there?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you guys have seen us at an event, we'll have we'll have our Vangst squad, our Vangsters out there. We're going to have a pretty big group. We'll have our booth where we'll be doing everything from giving general information to literally meeting candidates in person. Last year, we were setting up interviews between candidates and companies that we work with. This year, we're really working to be strategic, and we're actually going to be holding strategic planning sessions, workforce development sessions. You know, you can sit with us, someone like myself, a recruiting team, a couple of other people, and really plan out your staff and your strategy for Q1, Q2. Don't go and try and figure out, I just hit this goal and now I need to hire people. Figure that out now so it happens naturally. So we're doing things like that. I won't say too much about it, but should be launching some new things as well.
Yeah, you hinted to it earlier.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could tell me a little bit.
We essentially have a version of it. You know, Vangst Gigs has been doing a lot of cool things on the production side, but our goal is to really change the recruiting aspect of things. Recruiting is a very old school manual thing, and I don't think it needs to be. We're about to be in 2020, finding ways to really break that old school mold to catch up to the industry. The industry is, I think the cannabis industry is awesome because, you know, especially in California, like it's tech, like it's cannabis, but it's also tech as well. Like half of these companies have a huge tech component to it.
Awesome. Well, I think with MJ and all that jazz, I think we wrapped up 2019. So looking forward to seeing what's up for 2020.
2020 is going to be cool. It's going to be crucial. You're going to start to see people continue to really cement themselves, plant their feet in the ground, which needs to happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can't wait. I feel like cannabis is only picking up, so there's going to be a lot to look forward to. So let's see. But Justinian, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about the state of cannabis. Can you tell people, one, from a recruitment standpoint, how do people submit their resumes and get access to Vangst?
Yeah, go to Vangst.com, Vangst. It might be behind me. Yep, bam. Vangst.com. You can find a lot of information there, whether you're looking for the gigs type work, if you're looking for full-time work. If you're a company looking to hire your staff, you can start at Vangst.com. You can put in a request. If you're in California, you're going to talk to me eventually. So you can actually reach out to me directly, Justinian at Vangst.com. Name's up there. Vangst is right there as well. So reach out to me. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram as well. All of it goes to my phone at the end of the day, so reach out and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening to the Knowleaf podcast. Get in the know. You can follow us at Knowleaf everywhere, and Knowleaf.com for licensed cannabis suppliers. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.